Jeffrey Dahmer's story is the nightmare of a quiet building hiding loud secrets. Raised in the Midwest, Dahmer learned early to mask his impulses behind politeness and routine. Between 1978 and 1991, he targeted young men, often people on the margins of the city, luring them with offers of money, photos, or a safe place to hang out. What followed was a calculated pattern of control that escalated over years. He didn't hunt in alleyways. He turned home into the crime scene, keeping trophies and evidence that made his eventual arrest unforgettable to the detectives who saw it. The case shows chilling flaws in systems that should protect the vulnerable. At least once, officers encountered Dahmer mid-pattern and, after a deeply controversial interaction, left, allowing him to continue. His victims, many from communities that faced bias and limited trust in authorities, were the least likely to be believed and the most likely to be overlooked. Dahmer was arrested in 1991 when a survivor escaped and flagged down help. Inside the apartment, police found damning evidence that ended any doubt. In 1992, he was convicted in Wisconsin and sentenced to multiple life terms. He later died in prison in 1994 after an attack by another inmate. Why does Dahmer stick in the public mind? Because he weaponized the ordinary. He made evil look like just another neighbor, and that forces a hard question on all of us. How many red flags get waved away because someone seems normal? Dahmer's legacy is a grim checklist. Believe the vulnerable, investigate the strange, and never assume quiet means safe. If Dahmer hid behind the walls of an apartment, the next predator hid behind a smile and a law book. Ted Bundy turned charisma into camouflage. In the mid-1970s, while studying, volunteering, and presenting the picture of ambition, he was moving across multiple states and leaving a trail of disappearances and killings. He often feigned injury, an arm in a sling, books dropped on a sidewalk, to disarm strangers and manipulate them into proximity. Bundy's cruelty wasn't just the violence, it was the betrayal of social instincts. He knew most people want to help. He used that kindness as the trap. Investigators faced a suspect who looked nothing like the boogeyman. Bundy blended into college campuses and city sidewalks. He changed jurisdictions, which complicated early coordination, and he drove a common car that became infamous only after witnesses connected the dots, the Volkswagen as a lure and getaway. When the facade finally cracked, it did so in dramatic fashion. Arrests, jailhouse escapes, twice, then an explosion of national attention during televised Florida trials, where Bundy tried to repurpose his charm as legal theater. It didn't work. He was convicted for multiple murders, including the notorious attacks at Florida State University's Chi Omega House. The death sentence followed, and in 1989, Bundy was executed. Bundy's crimes reshaped public behavior. Women learned to second-guess polite strangers. Campuses adopted new safety protocols. Law enforcement began to share data across lines more aggressively. He also changed how media covers serial predators. The camera can mythologize if we're not careful. The point isn't that Bundy was brilliant, it's that he was believable, and that's what made him lethal.
John Wayne Gacy projected stability, a contractor, a neighbor, a volunteer. He used that image to disarm suspicion and recruit employees, often young men looking for quick work who would later become targets. When a teenager disappeared after applying for a job, investigators followed a line of receipts, sightings, and contradictions back to Gacy's suburban house. The smell beneath the floor wasn't a plumbing issue. It was a mass grave. Gacy's pattern was about control, luring victims with jobs or promises, then trapping them where escape was impossible. He compartmentalized his life so thoroughly that friends could attend a barbecue in the backyard, while police, in time, unearthed body after body below. The scale stunned even seasoned detectives. Eventually, remains were found both in the crawl space and elsewhere on the property, with additional victims recovered from the nearby river. Arrested in 1978, Gacy's trial was a clash of spectacle and sorrow. Prosecutors presented meticulous evidence. Families waited for the truth. The public wrestled with cognitive dissonance. How could a person who entertained as Pogo the Clown harbor this level of cruelty? The jury had little doubt. Gacy was convicted of murdering dozens of young men and boys and was executed in 1994. Gacy's case forced reforms: better tracking of missing persons, stronger interagency cooperation, and a new skepticism toward the pillar of the community mask. It reminded investigators to look past performance and into patterns. Who goes missing? From where? And who was the last to see them alive? If Gacy's crimes were anchored to a house, the next predator moved with the night itself, bringing terror to doorways across a city.
Richard Ramirez weaponized the hours after midnight. In 1984-1985, he prowled neighborhoods in Southern California, slipping into homes and unleashing a series of attacks, burglaries, assaults, and murders that felt random, personal, and unavoidable. The method bred terror: marks, a distinct shoe, stolen items resurfacing. Media attention amplified the fear and the hunt. When Ramirez's face finally hit the news, there was a twist. The public helped catch him. People recognized him on the street, pursued him, and restrained him until police arrived. It was a rare moment where a community, exhausted and angry, closed the distance themselves. In court, the Night Stalker persona collided with the reality of evidence: survivors' testimony, forensic links, and stolen property tying crimes together. Ramirez was convicted of multiple murders and other felonies and received the death penalty. He remained on death row until he died in 2013 of complications from illness. Ramirez's legacy is twofold. He taught Americans that home doesn't always mean safe, and he pushed investigative work forward, linking cases across precincts, leveraging media without losing control, and tracking forensic breadcrumbs that seemed insignificant until assembled. He also stands as a case study in how a predator can thrive on chaos, choosing unpredictability as his signature. Our next case flips the script: a female serial killer whose roadside encounters became national headlines.
Eileen Wuornos' story is a collision of trauma, rage, and predation on the margins. Living rough and working along highways, she encountered men alone in cars, isolated spaces where control can change hands in seconds. Between 1989 and 1990, 7 men were found dead across Central Florida. Wuornos said she acted in self-defense. Prosecutors said it was robbery-motivated murder. The public, unused to the idea of a woman as serial predator, fixated on every detail. Investigators pieced together a timeline using pawn slips, witness statements, and a recovered vehicle tied to one of the victims. Surveillance photos and composite sketches circulated. Wuornos was arrested at a biker bar after police leveraged her close friend to encourage a confession. On camera, she described the killings. Later, she shifted explanations, but the damage was done. In court, the case hinged on pattern: multiple victims, similar circumstances, and property taken after attacks. Prosecutors framed Wuornos as a highway predator targeting opportunity. The defense leaned into a lifetime of abuse and her claims of self-defense. Juries convicted. In 2002, Wuornos was executed. Wuornos forces hard questions. How do poverty, trauma, and addiction intersect with violence? How do we separate explanation from excuse? And what does justice look like when both victim and offender are, in different ways, products of neglect? Her story is a grim reminder that predators don't arrive with a single profile. They can be charming or broken, stable or unstable,
familiar, or frightening. The danger isn't the stereotype, it's the pattern. From highways to home invasions to houses with crawl spaces, one killer turned his crimes into letters, taunting the city by mail.
Dennis Rader blended a mundane suburban life with a secret identity that haunted Wichita for decades. Beginning in the 1970s, he attacked families and individuals in their homes, then vanished into ordinary routine. Church commitments, a stable job, neighborhood rules enforced with petty precision. He reappeared through letters, cold, methodical descriptions, and demands for attention, forcing law enforcement to chase a phantom with a pen. For years, the BTK case sat like a scar across the community. Evidence was thin, the offender was disciplined. Time seemed to bury leads. Then Rader made a mistake only a controlling ego makes. He restarted the correspondence. He asked the police if a floppy disk would be traceable. No, came the public answer. He sent the disk anyway. Forensics recovered a clue that pointed to a church computer and ultimately to Rader himself. DNA closed the circle. Arrested in 2005, Rader confessed in chilling, matter-of-fact detail, mapping his crimes like a project plan. He pleaded guilty and received multiple life sentences. The courtroom wasn't a spectacle. It was a spreadsheet of cruelty delivered in his own voice. Rader's case is a masterclass in patience, both the killers and the investigators. It shows how predators can hide behind small-town normalcy and how ego can be the crack in any perfect mask. It also demonstrates the evolution of forensic work, from shoe leather and interviews to metadata and digital breadcrumbs that arrogant offenders don't understand or respect. BTK haunted one city. The next killer haunted an entire region, using rivers and ravines to keep his secrets.
Gary Ridgway targeted women and girls, often people surviving at society's edges, including sex workers, between the early 1980s and 1990s in the Seattle-Tacoma area. The pattern was chillingly utilitarian: lure, attack, discard in remote or wooded areas, often near water. The Green River label stuck after multiple victims were discovered along or near that waterway, but the geography spread wider as the case unfolded. For years, investigators wrestled with a ghost. The victims were hard to trace because of frequent moves, aliases, or lack of strong ties. Scenes yielded little, and the killer adjusted. Tips poured in, suspects were tested, and the case became a long, grinding search for a mistake the killer refused to make. DNA technology finally changed the calculus. In 2001, updated forensic testing linked Ridgway, by then a married truck painter with a quiet routine, to several victims. Confronted with the evidence, he admitted to an astonishing scale of killing. He ultimately pleaded guilty to 49 murders, with law enforcement long suspecting the true number is higher. The plea spared him the death penalty and required him to help locate remains, providing families with answers they had been denied for years. Ridgway's legacy is the reminder that victim selection matters. Predators target people they think police won't prioritize. The response must be the opposite: invest even harder where vulnerability is highest. The case also emphasized the power of cold case DNA work. Time is not the enemy of justice when evidence is preserved and science improves. Decades before genetic genealogy had a name, one predator left a forensic trail no one could connect until a family tree did it for him.
Joseph DeAngelo wore multiple labels across the 1970s and 80s. The East Area Rapist near Sacramento, the original Night Stalker in Southern California, and, once investigators connected the series, the Golden State Killer. The pattern evolved, prowling neighborhoods, studying routines, and attacking in homes. He brought weapons, planning, and a level of control that made survivors believe he'd been watching for weeks. For decades, the cases remained unsolved. Multiple agencies held pieces of the puzzle, but the picture wouldn't snap into focus. Then, forensic science changed the rules. Investigators uploaded crime scene DNA to a public genealogy site and built a family tree, branch by branch, cousin by cousin, until a short list emerged. D'Angelo, a former police officer living a quiet suburban life, was one of the final names. A discarded item provided a DNA match. The arrest ended a mystery that had haunted California for generations. In 2020, D'Angelo pleaded guilty to 13 murders and admitted to dozens of assaults, receiving multiple life sentences without parole. In court, survivors spoke with a clarity and power time hadn't dimmed. The man who once whispered threats now sat silent, the scientific certainty overwhelming any lingering doubts. D'Angelo's case is a landmark, not just for the capture, but for the method. Genetic genealogy redefined what cold case means. It also exposed a truth common to these stories. Predators rely on silence, between victims, between agencies, and within communities. When those silences are broken, by data sharing, survivor courage, and new science, the mask finally cracks. 8 names, 8 methods, 1 lesson. Don't be fooled by normalcy. Predators count on it. Justice breaks it.